Hi gentle people, good morning. Today I'm proud to present you my last finished model, this VOMAG 9-ton with the 88mm German anti-aircraft gun on top of it. This is the kit you see here behind me. It was not an easy build, it was a big project. Basically this kit includes almost 3 kits in one box. You have the chassis, the bus chassis, you have a gun platform and you have the gun itself. So it's not the type of kit you will do in a month. It will require a lot of time, at least if you want to do something decently correct. Watch out anyway, this kit is beautiful, very nice adjustments, very nice documentation booklet with historical pictures. But anyway, I wouldn't recommend this kit for beginners. I think this kit is more for advanced modelers or at least intermediate modelers who already have the habit to read plan views and to find the missing items. The biggest challenge of this kit is the instruction manual. I wouldn't say that it is a bad instruction manual. I've read a lot of comments on Facebook, on the social medias, of people complaining, saying it was really crap and so on. It's not true. Anyway, it's true that this instruction manual here includes a lot of plan views, a lot of pages, but there are some missing parts. I would say that to the staff of das Werk, if you are looking at this video now, sometimes you show how to assemble pieces, but you do not show the result of this assembly. And sometimes it is confusing because we would like to see how these pieces are glued together at the final stage. It would prevent some accidents. I will be honest, I did a stupid monkey from time to time, it happens. But anyway, I think that the instruction manual could be improved, and I've decided not to do a full building review of this kit, but instead to do a more booby trap focused build section, just for those who are interested in realizing this kit, just not to fall in the same mistakes I did. I did especially 2 big mistakes, and it cost me a lot of time and a lot of work to correct these mistakes. So aside of this, it is a beautiful kit. You have a lot of beautiful sculpted details. You have a lot of options. I like especially these MOB doors to be opened. These doors to be opened, the rifles of the crew. You know, if you want to do it, you can even go for an engine bay open. You can do it in fire position. You can do it in transport position. It's quite nice. So let's dive into business. You see that this video is quite big. You will find in the description below all the different chapters and select what you want to see, what you need really. Basically, I divided the content in the build part and then the painting and weathering by section. To my opinion, the best way to tackle this model is to divide it in 3 parts. Focus on the chassis, then another part for the shooting platform, this big part here, and finally the gun itself. And at the end you can assemble these 3 parts together and it fits perfectly. So that's the way I did it, and I hope it could help you. One thing you will quickly notice during the building procedure is the presence of quite a lot of ejector pin marks and residual plastic gates that you will have to eliminate. Some of them leaving some little holes in the plastic parts. Most of the time it's quite strategically located, so it's not necessary to fill them out with a little bit of putty and then to sand. It will depend mainly on what will be visible on your finished kit. Unfortunately, in the case of the ammo bay, for example, the frontal plate with all these holes for the ammunition has quite a lot of ejector pin marks. It's quite boring because it gives quite a lot of additional work. I would have preferred to see these marks on the opposite side of these plates. As I said initially in this video, the adjustment precision is quite outstanding in general. So if you see that your pieces are not adjusting perfectly or not precisely, let's say you have 1 millimeter off, that's most probably because you did a mistake somewhere before. The construction of the chassis in general, so from step 1 till step 14, happened very well, so I had almost no issue with this. The alignment of the chassis was quite good, no twisting, no disalignment at any location, so it happened to be quick and efficient. A first little moment of doubt at step 1, sub-step A and C. These are 2 little gearboxes, and these boxes are maintained in position only by a tiny point of contact on their transverse frame with a tiny gap of, let's say, 0.5 millimeter spacing. This spacing is normal, so do not cut this point of contact to glue the gearboxes straight on the transverse frame. You must have this spacing, it's important. So you can see here the location of the main transmission shaft in between these 2 gearboxes. So the spacing is really precise. If you do an error of placement with the gearboxes, you will have an issue to glue afterwards these transmission shafts. The engine section is really nice. It gives the possibility to make a kit with the engine bay opened. Now, if like me you go for a completely closed engine bay, then you can paint everything in black inside because nothing will be visible. So for the training I painted the engine a little bit as if it could be visible, but honestly you won't see anything once everything will be closed. So personally I decided to wash, prime and paint and also weathered the engine and the engine bay prior to continuing to step 11 and clothing everything. Personally I do feel more confident and comfortable when I can access everything to paint instead of moving forward with the complete assembly and then having to paint the whole stuff as one block. Despite the instruction manual saying to paint the full engine in gunmetal, I decided to use these photographs I found on the internet to guide my work with the painting of the engine. To gain time, I won't enter the detail of this painting procedure of the engine, but just to make it quick, the upper casing is white aluminium, the central part and main body is black, and the lower casing is steel from Alclad. Once the whole engine bay was painted, I closed it and continue with the build procedure. So as you can see, the adjustments are really good. We can nevertheless emphasize a little bit the lack of anchor points. For example, on these lateral panels of the engine, I think an anchor point could have helped to maintain this piece at the very precise and correct position. So it's not that easy to put this lateral panel correctly, especially because this panel is inclined on its bottom part. So generally speaking, on this kit, the anchor points are a little bit too small, and we should see more anchor point to help positioning the pieces correctly. Watch out with this specific piece is the steering wheel shaft at step 7. I met some difficulties to fix this shaft in the correct position, as it was a little bit in conflict with one part of the engine, and also because of the anchor point again here, much too small and completely useless. As you can see on these images, I closed the engine left panel prior to put this shaft in position, because this left panel also has an impact on the positioning of this shaft. To make it happen, I had to sand a little bit the backside of the steering wheel shaft and to add a little styrene rod to make contact with the main chassis. This specific part was a little bit challenging, and I had to take a little bit of time to make it happen correctly. Aside of that, the main chassis construction was rather easy and precise. Again here with the mudguard, another example of weak anchor points. I think personally that stronger anchor points would have helped to position these mudguards on an easier way. After closing the driver compartment, step 11 till step 13, I had some little gaps, tiny ones, nothing serious. I just filled them with a mixture of Tamiya putty mixed with lacquer thinner from Tamiya, just to make it a little bit more fluid and to enter these little crevices. The excess of putty was removed with Q-tips dipped in Tamiya lacquer thinner. It's quite easy and that's probably the best way to sand this putty on a very quick and easy manner. Given my diorama intends to illustrate this vehicle in combat position or in shooting position, the stabilizing arm need to be in extended position. You can imagine now the size of this model with the arms extended. It represents an additional challenge because it turns this scale model difficult to handle and fragile at the same time. That's why I've decided to divide my construction in 3 parts and to separate the shooting platform from the main chassis. Gun platform construction, watch out here, there are a few points to take into consideration if you do not want to meet some troubles. First thing first, the most important one is the positioning of pieces number C19 and C2 at step 15. These 2 pieces are to be positioned at 90 degrees from each other and form the front mudguard of the rear wheels casing. There is no indication on how these 2 pieces are positioned to each other. So basically you have 2 options, and I told you I did the stupid monkey and I selected the bad one. The instruction manual tells you where to position these 2 pieces, and you even have an engraved lines in the gun platform, but you have no pictures on how to position these 2 pieces towards each other. So basically, to position these 2 pieces correctly, the piece number C2 should end its course against the piece C19 and not end its course on the side of the piece C19. If you do like me and you do it wrong, you will notice your error only at step 20, so 5 steps later. While trying to put the lateral mudguard, you will see that the piece C19 is too far out and you will have a gap of 1 mm between your mudguard and the gun platform. On these images, these 2 pieces already have been corrected, and it required quite a lot of work because they were glued firmly in position. And it might sound evident when you are looking at these images to position these 2 pieces like that. But my feeling at that moment was reinforced by the fact that the way I positioned C2 and C19, C19 was perfectly aligned with the gun platform extension. At that time, I was not thinking that the lateral mudguard still had to come in position. So watch out with this step, and if there is any guys from the staff of Das Werk looking at these pictures, guys, please update the instruction manual with an additional small drawing to explain the positioning of C2 and C19. The second error I did with this gun platform construction was exactly at the same step, the step 15. This step was definitely cursed for me. The conflict point was the substep E, the square E, that instructs you how to build the hinges frames for the platform drop sides. I was a bit too quick on that, and I started the build procedure as explained in the sub-square E, thinking that there is no engraved lines to receive these hinges frames, so the parts N30 and N29. So to make them completely parallel and well organized, it will be difficult. And guess what? It was clearly difficult and I did not manage to get all these frames completely parallel, which is quite logical and obvious. So when I tried afterwards to put in position this sub-element E on the gun platform, it was a complete mess, as you can see live on these images. So, solution. Well, first I had to destroy the work I did so far, so remove all these frames one by one. I did it with caution and I managed to do it without breaking anything, but it was really limit because the glue was already completely dry and it was sticking quite firmly. So the correct method is not to follow the instruction manual. You have to put first the main support C20 and C18 on the gun platform without the hinges frames. It's quite easy because on the gun platform you have a notch to glue this main support in position. These are the images you are seeing now. And once these two support plates are firmly in position and the glue is completely dry, you glue all hinges frame one by one on the support, which will be much easier because below the gun platform you have notches to receive these frame hinges. This way of working is not only easier, but more important, it's much more efficient and it will allow you to have all these hinges frames perfectly aligned to receive later on the gun platform drop sides. If these hinges frames are not aligned, you won't succeed to enter the drop sides in their hinges. A few quick words on the ammo bay construction. So that part is quite easy. As you see, there are notches to receive all the different frames. So that's quite straightforward and I did not encounter any specific issue with this part. I can only regret the presence of many ejector pin marks on the frontal panel, which will be visible if you leave the ammo bay doors opened. And as I said, it's an eye catcher because obviously if you leave the doors open to see the shells in their compartment, a lot of people would like to see the inside. Strangely, I had a small gap to fill in on the lateral side of this frontal panel. Not that much, let's say about 0.5 millimeter. So I put a small evergreen strip behind this panel and I filled this little gap with Tamiya putty. It was also necessary to wash, prime and paint all this area before closing it, obviously, because afterwards it will be too late and impossible to reach. As I've explained, I have decided to assemble the whole superstructure of the bus as one single element. So that means to assemble the gun platform together with the ammo bay prior any assembly on the main chassis. Doing so, watch out with the crew seats. You have to make some tests to glue them in the correct position to be sure that they won't hamper the positioning of the ammo bay on this gun platform. I also replaced all the mooring rings planned in the kit on the lateral panel, but also on the sides of the platform drop sides. The plastic ones were really tiny and also not workable. I mean, they are so tiny that the hole is filled in with plastic, so they are not really usable. So I just replaced all these little plastic mooring rings by little brass rods 0.3 millimeter coming from Albion alloy. I started first with my photo etch bending tool, but it rapidly proved to be boring and a little bit difficult to use. So I finally continued just using a pair of tweezers and it was much quicker and easier. The result is much more convincing and at least now it's possible to attach something like tarps or equipment with ropes. The drop sides are provided with photo etch grids. The fitting is perfect, at least if you cut them properly and you sand them properly. I had no single issue with this part. Personally, to avoid to fill in the mesh with cyanoacrylate glue, I've decided to glue the 3 sheets together only by capillarity. So as you see, the fitting of the 3 sheets one above the other is perfect, and all you have to do is just glue laterally and leave your glue enter these sheets by capillarity. The final fitting of these grits in their final position is also done with cyanoacrylate glue, only a few points, and this fitting is just excellent, no problem. The fitting of the lateral panels and the rear section of this ammo bay was okay, not that easy. As you can see, there was a little tension to fit the rear central plate, probably a small conflict with the interior of the ammo bay, but nothing serious. I just add a small styrene sheet behind the rear central panel just to make sure that cracks won't appear in the future. The ammo bay rooftop fitting was also quite nice. Obviously a few little gaps left and right, but easy to fill in with Tamiya putty. And I also use cyanoacrylate on top of all that to make sure that cracks won't appear in the future, so that I've got a perfect seam and nothing is visible. Here we are. The last step is to introduce the platform drop sides in their hinges. No big deal. A little bit of pressure was required, but it enters perfectly and locked automatically within the frames. I left these platform drop sides unglued just to facilitate the future handling. And as you can see, the fact that I have the gun platform in one kit apart from the chassis helped me quite a lot for handling and for the painting procedure. Okay guys, last construction step, the construction of this 88mm anti-aircraft gun, and that's probably the part I enjoyed the most. First point first, I planned initially to buy and to fit this kit with the Eber metal cannon, aluminum cannon, but unfortunately the size is not the same. So it's quite strange because the reference of the Eber cannon is the same gun as the one in the kit, so it's a 88mm FLAK 36. But there is quite a big difference of size, and after checking the web for the official 88mm dimensions, I must confess that Das Werk has the points and the dimension of the Das Werk cannon are correct. The advantage of working with an aluminum cannon in one single piece is that you do not have the risk of any flat surface result of the sanding actions after the gluing procedure. You don't have neither the risk of having cracks appearing between the different elements constituting the gun, and for the lazy guys, you don't have to sand it at all. Luckily, Das Werk proposed the last element of the gun, so the last upper half of the gun in one single piece, so there is no gluing seam at all on this part. Only the first half of the cannon has to be sanded carefully, the same as for the recoil system, the recoil cylinders and the gun mount equilibrators below the gun. So a few advices if you want to avoid these flat surfaces and the cracks to appear on your gun barrels. So personally, I first apply, after gluing, a thin layer of cyanoacrylate glue on the gluing seam. Cyanoacrylate glue is really liquid and will enter any potential cracks, even the cracks that you cannot see immediately. After complete drying of this cyano glue, I start sanding with a nail stick, but watch out here, do not use the coarse grit, so use an intermediate grit, just not to remove too much material at once. Try to be gentle and sand softly, and during this sanding operation, continue to turn the barrel left and right a little bit, just not to focus the sanding operation on the same surface, which will result in a flat surface. This first operation will help you to get rid of the cyanoacrylate glue. The second step will be to continue the sanding operation with different sandpapers. Personally, I started with 400 grit, 600 grit, and finally 1000 grit. These sandpapers should be a little bit curved, just to take the shape of the gun barrel. And you should continue to turn the barrel left and right to avoid any flat surface to appear. So the sanding action should be really soft and progressive. So here is the result, the side with the cyanoacrylate still not sanded, and the other side already treated that way, so really softly. The result is nice. Take care not to damage the different details of the gun sculpture. There are many small pieces to be glued on this cannon, so it is sometimes required to move through the instruction manual and to go and check a few pages further to confirm the correct fitting of some pieces. It's not always clear-cut to understand the correct placement of each piece. In case of any doubt, just go through the pages of the instruction manual or go and check some real footage pictures. You have some walkarounds available on the web, so no problem. You can basically find almost all views you need to complete this construction. Watch out to sand correctly the gluing seam on the breech block, as this piece of metal was molded in one piece. Okay, now the biggest problem I faced with this gun construction, watch out. We are speaking about step 32 and 34. All the instructions in the booklet are valid for a gun in horizontal position. Because the gear wheel of the elevation system in step 32 was to be left unglued, I thought initially that the elevation system of this gun was adjustable, was workable. It is not the case. So basically you will have to select a gun elevation and glue your cannon at that position. My intention was to put this cannon in combat position, in firing position, so with a high angle of elevation. And this is where shit hit the fans. Step 34, first pass, or the first square, you are instructed to glue the piston of the cylinder, H9, within piece H26. Don't do that. This position is done for a gun in horizontal position. And because the piece number H26 is closed and was already glued in position, I had no other option than to reduce the length of the pistons. To be honest, I don't see really the interest of this piece H26. For me, it's not even necessary to use it. Personally, I think that leaving the piston completely free inside the cylinder is probably the best option. The second booby trap of this step 34 is the second square, where you are proposed an optional mounting in between piece M2, the short version of the gun mount equilibrator, the one you are seeing here on these images, or the long version composed of piece M4 and M3. The problem is that they do not explain what is the difference between M2 and M3. So if you are like me and you do not really know how an 88mm cannon works, then you will think initially, like me probably, that it should be a difference of cannon type. So I've decided to run through the web to check a maximum of pictures to see what type of cannon was on this VOMAG truck, and guess what? Most of the pictures I've seen on the web were either with really poor quality or with gun in a lower elevation, but all of these pictures look to me that the M2 piece was the correct one or the most common one. And I decided stupidly to use the piece M2. Bad solution. So basically I built my cannon completely, I painted, I weathered it with this piece M2 until the moment I published my pictures on Facebook, where my dear friend Wick Creed told me, yes man, your cannon is really nice, but by the way, you did a mistake. Your gun-mounted equilibrators are not in the right position for the given elevation. So Wika sent me a couple of pictures taken in a booklet explaining how the 88mm Canon worked, and yes, damn, I was wrong. So I had to modify everything after painting. Bullshit. A lot of work and obviously a very delicate operation. I explain you how this gun is working so that you can understand why you have to select between M2 and M3. So basically when the gun is in horizontal position, the gun mount equilibrators in green and purple on these images are in this position. The cylinder piston is in cyan. When the gun rises, the cylinder piston is pushed forward and at a certain point is making pressure on the second part of the gun mount equilibrator in purple. These two gun mount equilibrators are now in the longest position. Fortunately, this heavy surgery happened well. I managed to correct this, and you see now the corrected version of this cannon in elevated position. Aside of these few problems with the gun construction, this whole process happened quite well, and the result is really nice. To make the junction between the construction phase and the painting, let's have a word about the wheels. Congrats here once more to the Werk team for this nice opportunity to build these wheels by layers. So basically each wheel is composed of 5 layers that you have to glue one against the other. It's super easy, super efficient, and the result is really nice. A few small advice anyway to facilitate the job. Watch out with these layers. The thinnest one are quite fragile, so watch out when you take them out from the sprue, and when you manipulate these pieces they can break easily. And second advice is do not try to sand these pieces prior to the gluing phase. So just remove properly these layers from the sprue and glue them immediately together until you have the complete wheel, and then only sand the wheel to remove the excess of plastic. Watch out, it is not really mentioned in the instruction manual, but the intermediate layer, the thinnest one, have a direction, so you cannot glue them upside down. If you put these pieces in the wrong position, then the drawing of the wheels is not fitting correctly. Sanding these pieces after the assembly is much easier, and you won't take the risk to break the thinnest layer or to damage the sculpted details. Just like all the parts of this kit, the wheels have been washed with water and soap, and also have been primed. I used Mr. Finishing Surfacer 1500 Black, thinned with Mr. Color Leveling Thinner. All the pieces of this kit have been primed using the same setting. The wheels have been painted then with the base coat. The base coat was the same for all the parts of this kit, whether it's the platform or the chassis or the gun. This base coat was composed of 80% of XF63 German grey, 10% of white XF2 and 10% of XF57 buff. The whole paint diluted with 55% of lacquer thinner from Tamiya. With respect to the aerograph setting, I used for the wheels only the 0.2mm needle and an air pressure of 1.5 bars. I then realized 2 layers of chipping, the first one with German grey from AK Interactive, and the second one with chocolate from the same brand. And I used the sponge technique for 90%, the 10 remaining percent done with a small paintbrush in the crevices of the wheels. I then sprayed 2 layers of scratch effect from Megamo. This product is sprayed pure with 1.5 bar of pressure and the needle 0.4. To accelerate the drying period, I just use an air dryer between each layer. On top of that, I sprayed a layer of flat white XF2 diluted at 50%. I use my needle 0.4, pressure 1.5 bar. Here the aim is not to completely cover the central hub with a full layer of white, but just making some clouds of white. You can increase the thickness of this layer at some places, knowing that the thicker this thickness, the more difficult it will be to remove it afterwards. It's now time to reactivate the scratch effect product with a little bit of hot water and to remove progressively a little bit of this white layer according to your desire. We try to work on a logic way. Here obviously the lower you are on the chassis, the more worn out is the paint layer. So normally you should remove a little bit more white camo on these areas, but also on all the areas of the truck and the gun platform where the crew activity was more intensive. It's a very funny process. Don't forget at the end of this process to clean all the pieces and around these pieces, because it's a quite dirty process, leaving some residues of paints a little bit everywhere. Here is a comparison on before and after this procedure, and you see the result is really interesting. It gives a very worn out aspect to our wheel hubs. The next step was to paint all the rubber band with rubber black from AK Interactive. I painted these tires with a paintbrush. I applied 2 or 3 layers of thinned paint. Afterwards, I apply a layer of VMS satin varnish. This layer of varnish is important to facilitate the next weathering phase. Here I apply a dark wash on all the little details of the wheels. I'm gonna remove the excess of dark wash product with another paintbrush dipped in white spirit. Prior to the application of the snow, I gave a little translucent layer of flat earth diluted at 80%, just to dirt a little bit the central hub with a layer of residual mud. For this step I use an air pressure reduced to 1 bar and my needle of 0.2, and as you can see I also removed the airbrush needle diffuser to gain in precision. Actually, I was so happy to finish the gun construction and so eager to seeing it with its final war color that I started the painting procedure with the gun. As I explained in the previous section with the wheels, it was washed and primed the same manner. The base coat application was also exactly applied the same way with the same setting and the same paint. Here we take advantage of the black primer to apply our German grey in thin layers, like a cloud, making some spots of paint and increasing the density of the paint progressively. The aim is to try to make a kind of pre-shading with this black primer. To prepare the application of metal color from Alclad at some key location, I sprayed a layer of X1 gloss black, but only on these specific areas, so the bridge block and the gun support ring. I then painted these areas with Alclad colors, reference is steel, with 2 bar of pressure and my needle of 0.4. Quite easy and a nice realistic result for these metal areas. I then corrected a little bit the overspray with another layer of the base coat, playing with some paper mask to protect my metallic zones. The next step was probably completely useless. I let you judge by yourself. So I decided to give more contrast to my grey paint to use the salt technique. So this is a common technique used in aircraft modeling. The idea is to give a monochromatic paint a more worn out appearance with some spots a little bit everywhere. So the technique is quite easy. You just spray clear water on your model. It should be completely wet. and then you apply some salt on top of it. The salt will obviously melt a little bit and get stuck on your model. You then wait for your model to dry completely prior to spray another color on top of it. And in this case, I use a modified version of my base coat. So my mixture here was 60% of XF63 and 40% of white XF2, so a much lighter color. The dilution here was 70% with lacquer thinner. So this layer of paint is rather thin and translucent. Once it's finished, you just have to remove all the salt with a little bit of water, like I'm doing now, and you now have a worn out paint. You can repeat this process with the salt 2 or 3 times with different colors, different tones, to construct this worn out appearance. It is also generally required at the end of this process to spray on top of that a small layer of the original base coat, highly diluted, just to fade the effect, which is a little bit too contrasty. Here in this case I didn't do it because I knew in advance that with the white camo coming over it and all these coming heavy weathering procedures, this effect would fade quite rapidly. So I didn't pass another layer of the base coat on top of that. Here is the final result. As you can see now, this monochromatic German grey paint is much more worn out and attractive. We can then now continue with the chipping procedure with the sponge and with the paintbrush. Again, like for the wheels, it's a 2-step chipping procedure. The first step with German grey. This darker color will increase even more the contrasty aspects of our base coat. And a second step with camouflage black-brown from Vallejo. That one with the paintbrush mainly, just because it should be discreet and applied with much more precision. I wanted to keep this effect of more corroded appearance reduced, especially on the gun. Okay, time for some stencils. Personally, I've decided to replace the stencils for the kill rings by a real paint job. The reason is that, you know, whenever I can replace the stencils by real paint, it's always nicer. I also had the intention to reproduce a quite worn out appearance on those kill rings. So after the masking process with tape, I just applied some droplets of micro mask a little bit everywhere prior to spraying everything in white. Once the mask removed, I passed another layer of German grey chipping procedure with the sponge just to increase even more this worn out appearance of these kill rings. I found personally the stencil quality really good on this kit, really strong. I didn't have any of these stencils breaking during the application process, despite the fact that these stencils are really thin. And it was not necessary to apply any gloss varnish prior to their application. I did not encounter any silvering result after the application, so really nice work on these stencils, really easy to use and very nice quality. As usual, I use microsol and microset solution to ease this process, and after the drying period the stencils were matte without any strange reflection, so very nice. Alright, it's time to hide all this nice work below the white camo. So like for the wheels here, 2 layers of heavy chipping effects from Migamo. It's quite the same product as scratch effect. I think the weathered effect might differ a little bit from one product or the other, so I like to switch from one to the other without any specific reasons. Again, here the idea is to vary as much as we can the different effects. Just like for the wheels, we then spray our XF2 white As I already explained, watch out here. Try to work by applying a cloud of white and not to cover completely the gun with white. The idea is that the thinnest the layer, the easiest it will be to remove it. So you can already anticipate by creating different thickness of white on the gun. For example, here above the stencils, I left intentionally this white layer very thin to be able to remove it almost completely, as if the crew removed on purpose the white camo to leave these markings apparent. Watch out that these products from Megamo, these chipping products, are more efficient with acrylic colors. So whenever you are working like me here with lacquer color, it could be aka real colors, or in this case Tamiya XF color, thinned with lacquer thinner, these paints have a much stronger grip and are much more difficult to remove when reactivating the chipping effect with water, like I'm doing now. So do not apply too thick layers of these paints, and do not wait these paints to dry completely. Personally, immediately after my white application, I reactivate the product with water and I started the weathering process. After a nice coat of satin varnish from VMS, we can start the weathering procedure with enamel products. So I started as usual with a pin dark wash in all the crevices and details. I then started the work with oil paints to create spots of grease and you know, create dirty areas in these gray-white colors. A good way to reproduce grease is to make a mix of 50-50 of lamp black and burnt umber or raw umber, and apply this around all these maintenance areas, you know, where the technician need to lubricate some pieces. You know that guns are pieces of equipment that the crew has to protect from corrosion, and especially during the winter time where the level of humidity is really important, and guns are protected with a lot of grease and oils. So obviously this product leaves stains a little bit everywhere, finger marks and so on. So you have a lot of type of grease within the military. You have grease which are completely black. You have almost orange grease. You have brown grease. Some grease are heat resistant, others are not. Some grease are protecting better against humidity. So basically there is room for weathering and for your imagination. Try to apply these stains logically around the bolts, around the moving parts, around the locking mechanism that could be removed to replace the gun. All these pieces of equipment that need to be handled by technicians. I also used some ready-to-use product like this shaft and bearing grease from AK Interactive. I like to sprinkle this product with a hard bristle paintbrush and a toothpick. It's quite efficient and the effect is quite realistic. The next ready-to-use product I used was streaking grime. I mainly used it on the gun supports to create dirt streaks. This product is then removed and blended with a paintbrush dipped in a white spirit to create nice streaks. It's an easy product. You can remove the excess easily and create the effects you want. If you wanted the effect to be more visible, you just have to add a little bit more product, and you can easily speed up the process with an hairdryer. The last finishing touch of this weathering on this Canon was to use gunmetal pigments to reinforce the metal effect at some location. The weathering process have the tendency to reduce the metallic appearance we created with the FLAK product. So I passed these pigments on the breech block, on the elevation gauge, but also on some handles used commonly by the crew. and a little bit of black smoke pigment at the canon extremity, but just a little bit. Given some of you asked me how I painted the seats of this 88mm canon, here is my secret formula. It's quite easy. First of all, paint your seat with orange-brown reference from AK Interactive with a paintbrush. Apply multiple thin layers until your seat is completely orange-brown. Once dry, apply dots of burnt umber oil paints on top of it. Then take another flat paintbrush dipped in white spirit. It should not be completely wet, so you have to remove the excess of white spirit. And draw these spots of oil paints longitudinally. Repeat this operation a second time, so you apply a second layer of dots of this oil paint on the seats. But this time, instead of using a flat paintbrush to draw the oil spots, use a round, thin paintbrush to work these spots longitudinally with much more precision. And you draw these points of oil paints as if they were lines and veins, wood veins. And it's pretty it. The work is done, so it's quite easy. Once dry, you can just apply a thin coat of VMS satin varnish and paint the fixing bolt on top of the seat. Okay, let's enter the FLAKBUS painting now. So the procedure is the same whether we are dealing with the chassis or with the gun platform. Prior to any painting procedure, the kit was completely washed with water and soap. The kit was completely primed as explained in the wheel section procedure. And the kit will be painted with the same base coat as described in the wheel section and in the gun painting section. A small exception for the main chassis. Before applying the base coat, I decided to paint all the hydraulic cylinders from the stabilizer arms. So on these parts I applied a coat of gloss black X1 followed by an alclad chrome color. I applied the same procedure for the two main rear gearboxes, a first layer of gloss black followed by an alclad steel reference. The application of the base coat on the main chassis started only after these little paint jobs. After the base coat completed, I applied the sole technique as described in the gun painting procedure. It's exactly the same. For the main chassis and for the gun platform, I applied this sole technique only on the upper surfaces. So the paint reference used for this layer was a much lighter version of the base coat with 40% of white and without the buff reference, just to create this worn out appearance of the base coat. The front bumper extremities have been painted white, as can be seen on some historical footages. For the driver compartment there is not that much thing to be painted. An interesting or funny details is the steering wheel. Most of the VOMAGs had a black steering wheels, as can be seen on many historical references and also as described in the instruction manual. Nevertheless, I found an interesting pictures on the web of at least one VOMAG having a light colored steering wheel. Let's keep in mind that this vehicle was a technical. There were only a few ones built and the base for this construction was a civilian bus. So it is not excluded that some parts of this original chassis was maintained during the construction, or that due to whatever the mechanical failure, some parts had to be replaced with what was available on the market, so other pieces of this original civilian bus. To reproduce the leather aspect of the driver's seat, I did a mix of hull red and orange brown, 50-50. That was my base coat. And by the way, this is the exact same procedure that I'm gonna use for all the crew seats on the gun platform. I then created the leather texture, playing a little bit with oil paint references. So the first step is to create different clouds of brown colors using three main references, which are raw umber, burnt umber and burnt sienna. So you can apply little dots of oil paint pure on your base coat, like I'm doing now. The fourth color reference I used was ochre yellow, mainly used for the highlights or to create more worn out appearance. And then you blend these colors with a paintbrush dipped in white spirit. There is no specific pattern to be used. I mean, you are not obliged to draw these oil dots vertically. It's more like, as I said, creating a cloud. So the idea is to beat a little bit each spot with a flat paintbrush, a small flat paintbrush. Mine here is a Recap 316, until the result is pleasing to the eyes. I also reinforced the worn out appearance by adding afterwards a little bit more ochre yellow on the edges of the seat, but also more locally where the crew members were used to sit. A final brushing with a dry paintbrush will help to blend all these colors together. Just like for the wheels and the gun, we will apply 2 layers of chipping, the first one with German grey and the second one with chocolate acrylic colors. These are applied mainly with the sponge technique. We will then apply 2 layers of heavy chipping effect and proceed with the white camo exactly the same manner as for the gun. The inner sections of the main chassis were left unpainted with the base coat, as the white camo was only applied by the crew on a hasty way on all these sections of the vehicle that were accessible to them. So it was not the kind of paint job done by the industry. For the same reason, the underside of the gun platform was also left unpainted. Watch out here for the upper surfaces of the gun platform. This is an area where the crew activity was much more intense. So that means that all these areas where the crew had to walk in all directions and manipulate ammunition, these surfaces should be painted really slightly in white so that you can remove almost the totality of this white camo. Only in the corners would this white camo be still visible. You then reactivate the chipping fluid with hot water and you start to remove the white camo wherever you want until you reach the desired visual effect. The more worn out areas are the one of more intense crew activity or technician activity, so try to focus on these areas where the crew was living, sitting, sleeping, fighting of course, and repairing the vehicle. To facilitate the coming weathering operation, we apply a coat of VMS satin varnish and we leave it to dry 24 hours. We will start the weathering with a dark wash applied in all the crevices and around all the little details. While removing this product with a paintbrush dipped in white spirit, we can already take advantage of this moment to create first dirt streaks. In this case, the idea is to brush our product vertically. We then start the weathering procedure with oil paints. I give you here a few references that I like using to weather vehicles. So for dirty hand stains, you can use pure lamp black. To reproduce old grease, you can use a mix 50-50 of raw umber and lamp black. And if you want to reproduce a more orange-ish color grease, then you can mix 50-50 burnt umber and burnt sienna. This is, for example, the mix I used for the hydraulic cylinders of my stabilizer arms. Generally speaking, when trying to reproduce grease, don't be afraid to be generous with the application of oil paints and don't brush it too much so that you can keep a little bit of consistency. Another example here with the main hinges of my stabilizer arms, where I used the mix of lamp black and raw umber, which is a much darker color. Oil paints are a very effective and a cheap alternative to the ready-to-use product available on the market. This mix of lamp black and raw umber can also be used to create dirt streaks like here. You just have to apply a few oil paint dots on the top edges of your vehicle, and with a paintbrush dipped in white spirit, you just brush these dots of oil paints vertically. After this work with all paints, you can start the work with pigments. Personally, for this model, I've selected 3 references: dry mud, dark mud, and dark earth from Aptellum 502. I started with the lighter color, so the dry mud, and then I applied on top of it the 2 other darker tones. The same pigment references have been used for the gun platform, obviously focusing this pigment work in the corners. Finally, these pigments are fixed in position with a pigment fixer from AK Interactive. You can see on this picture the result of this work with pigments, where the dark mud is clearly visible on top of the dry mud. Finally, work with a black pencil and some gunmetal pigments was also necessary just to reinforce the metallic effect of some parts. As you can see on these images, part of this work with gunmetal pigments has occurred prior the application of the mud pigments, but I had to repeat this operation after the mud pigment application to reinforce the metallic appearance, as the effect was a little bit too faded with the mud pigments. Okay, last chapter, let's enter the winter period, guys, and speak about mud and snow effects. The first thing that comes to my mind when I think about the nice weather in Belgium, especially during the winter period, is the state in which my car was when it was snowing. Snowfalls always implies, you know, wet roads, muddy roads, a lot of humidity everywhere. I also remember my young years in the armed forces, when we were training at the training ranges in Vogelsang and Bergenheun. During the winter period, it was absolutely horrific, the state in which our tanks and trucks were. You can easily imagine the difficulty encountered by the crew when they were dealing with maneuvering a 10-ton vehicle off-road in North Europe winter conditions. The first effect you will have to reproduce before even apply mud or snow product is the mud cloud behind the wheels on the lateral sides of the vehicle, and sometimes also on the back side of the vehicle. To do that, I use the reference XF52 flat earth from Tamiya, diluted at 80% and sprayed with the airbrush with an air pressure of 1.5 bars and my needle of 0.4. I then started to apply my mud. I use for this Splatter Effect wet mud and muddy ground from AK Interactive. I use these 2 products separately but also combined, and I incorporated some grass flock late fall from AK Interactive within this mix, just to simulate the presence of torn out grass, vegetation during the maneuvers of such a heavy vehicle off-road. As you can see, Splatter Effect wet mud is much more liquid and also have a little bit more glossy finish. Muddy ground normally has to be used to create ground texture for diorama, but it's also a very nice alternative to accumulate mud below the mud guards. Here you see me doing a combination of all 3 products and apply this mix with a very thin paintbrush and very locally at some precise location where the soldier boots could have left some mud and some grass. You can blend this mud or fade the effect with a little bit of tap water. Another reference that I used in combination with Splatter Effect wet mud was Splatter Effect dry mud. I use this product only to speckle the lateral sides of the truck, as you are seeing now. I repeated exactly the same operation with Splatter Effect wet mud. It's what you can see here. Don't forget to speckle the lateral sides of the gun platform as well. I then applied heavily my muddy ground product inside the mud guard with here and there some touches of Splatter Effect wet mud. I also included from time to time a little bit of grass flock late fall. These little touches of vegetation will increase greatly the realism of the effect and will still be visible after snow application. Repeat the exact same process below the gun platform. To increase realism, you can then glue some tree leaves on your model. Personally, I glue them in position with PVA glue. Time to finish our model with snow effects. Again here, there are tons of possibilities of different snow. You can have melted snow, you can have hard snow, you can have soft snow, and there is plenty of different products available on the market. From AK Interactive, that's the ones I've decided to use, but you have also Notch, you have Migamo, and there are also some people using ordinary life products, but personally I don't really recommend it because you never know what could be the results at long term. It could be really heartbreaking to see your beautiful diorama that you took weeks or months to do turning yellow after a few weeks or months. As you can see on the wheels, I applied first terrain snow diorama. This easy product is applied with a paintbrush. You can use references pictures to help you in applying this product. And you can blend the edges of this product with tap water. It's quite easy to use. Immediately afterwards, without waiting, you can sprinkle snow micro balloons on top of this product so that it can have a nice grip. This is the reason why I do advise you not to work too large area at the time with terrain snow, as this product dries within 10 to 15 minutes. You can accelerate this drying period with an air dryer if needed, but to get the best grip possible, don't wait too much after the terrain snow application. Snow on the lower chassis is rarely pure and clean, so we need to dirt a little bit this snow with a kind of mud color. So to achieve this appearance, I use the burnt umber reference from AK Interactive, highly diluted with water. I'm speaking about a dilution above 90%. It's almost like water. And with a paintbrush, I apply this mixture by capillarity through the snow products. Here is the result at this stage. And you can see that I try to maintain as much variation as possible in the appearance of each wheel. I then reinforced a little bit the presence of dry mud around the central hub of the wheels. So for this I use splatter effect dry mud diluted with tap water, and I spread it around the central hub on the inner part of the tire. As I told you, terrain snow and snow micro balloons have a quite matte finish. So to reinforce the humidity presence, the water presence, it was necessary to incorporate some glossy effects. Quite easy with still water, it's from AK as well, so it's quite like a gloss varnish, but a little bit more consistent. Let's say it has a consistency in between the gloss varnish and a gel. So I use my 5/0 paintbrush, very thin one, to create water streaks all around the central hub, but also across the tires. This water obviously is coming from the melted snow, whether in its liquid state or in its solid state after icing in negative temperatures. The final step on these wheels was to speckle a little bit of splatter effect dry mud on all the wheels individually. So, a lot of work on these wheels, but I really like the results. The rest of the snow application procedure was rather similar than the mud application. I tried not to cover completely the mud effects we applied before, just to increase the level of realism, but also to leave a little bit all the efforts done so far visible. The sticky consistency of terrain snow product allows you to create accumulation of snow quite easily and almost to create icicles. Again here for the lower chassis, don't forget to dirt a little bit this beautiful white snow with burnt umber acrylic reference, highly diluted with water. I also speckled this burnt umber paint mixture on the lower chassis, but this time a little bit more concentrated, not so diluted. I also sprinkled some micro balloons on top of the snow product, just to give a little bit more volume. To my opinion, the terrain snow product in itself as a standalone product is not sufficient. Either you have to add micro balloons on top to give it more volume, or still water to give it more shiny appearance in the case of melted snow. In the case of the mud guards, for example, I used terrain snow at first. I applied then micro balloons on top, and finally, without waiting too much, like what I'm doing now, I applied still water to give this more humid appearance, this glossy appearance, as if this snow had already started to melt. Well, this is it, guys. I think I told you all my secrets, all the behind the scenes on this big project, this VOMAG 88mm FLAKBUS. Should you have any question, do not hesitate to contact me by message or in the comment section below. Do not hesitate neither to share your experiences, your own experiences, if you already realized this project. I think that the whole community could benefit from this sharing of experiences. I would conclude by saying that this kit is really original, interesting and challenging. So if you are an intermediate to advanced modeler, do not hesitate. Ciao ciao, greetings from Portugal.